Jon, super excited to be talking to you today. I'm really glad that you agreed to do this dialogue with me on transformation. I know it's a topic that is important to both of us in our roles, so really glad to have you here today.
No, it's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Great. I think some of the things that I've seen you have been doing at CPPIB are really fascinating, so that's sort of the conversation that I wanted to have today. Let's just start with, what is the topic of transformation?
Yeah, I'd say two things. I think everything we do starts with, does it make us a better investor? I mean, that's ultimately what we're there to do, to serve our beneficiaries and contributors. So if it doesn't sort of tie back to, does it make us a better investor? It's sort of not on the table. So I think that's like the anchoring purpose of how certainly how I think about transformation. I often get asked, like, what are my priorities around transformation? Given, frankly, how complicated the world is, I describe it as make everything better, everywhere, all the time, all at once. Because I think in today's world, you can't just be singularly focused on, one area of the organisation or another area of the organisation to be like really responsive, viable, frankly, be fit for the future and manage today. I think you have to make progress on all fronts simultaneously. Yeah. So I'm the opposite of prioritisation. I'm trying to make as much concrete, important changes as we can to make us a better investor.
Very outcomes focused, about the purpose of why you exist and making sure that everything links to it, which is something I find organizations struggle with, right? It's like a lot of change going on, but is somebody creating that golden thread back to the strategy or the purpose of why you exist as an organization? So I think those are things that everybody should be aspiring for.
Our purpose is very clear. It's to create, financial security for, Canadians generationally, 22 million Canadians today, and make sure that we are able to serve them well. So in a sense, we're fortunate that our purpose and mission is clear, but then you still got to turn it into concrete action. That's where some of the art and science happens.
How do you keep the maniacal focus on ensuring we're not just progressing line items on a plan, but we're focused on the outcomes? How are you instilling that outcome focus at CPPIB?
The most important thing we can do is get technology in the hands of people that can do something valuable. And you need to do that in a way that gives them the creative control to create the value that they're uniquely positioned to understand that they can create. You need to do it in a way that is, safe and secure, and puts the sort of right resilience and robustness around it. But I think you've ultimately got to leverage the understanding of the organization when you're making transformation. So that anchors you, I think, in some really simple principles, which is, give some autonomy to the team, make sure there's a reasonable degree of alignment, allow some exploration, some divergence, you want some creativity to happen, and then when you sort of got the sense that you're creating the right sort of value, how do you coordinate and converge across the organisation? So I'd say my anchoring principle is really, frankly, to put as much control in the hands of teams as is possible, in an environment which has some guardrails, enough guardrails, but not that stifles creativity.
Do you find that makes certain people in the organization uncomfortable, and how do you talk to those people?
I don't know if it makes people uncomfortable. I think part of the art, science, balance, whatever the judgment you have to make, I think as a leader, is how much tension do you put into the organisation? Not a stretching enough ambition actually really won't move forward. Too stretching ambition, you're not going to move forward for a different set of reasons. So I think finding how much tension you put into the organisation is important. That can be an uncomfortable set of conversations. You want people, I think, to be able to ask the question of, well, we could do that, but we'd have to do something quite different. Once you say something like quite different, uncertainty comes in. We are, for the most part, an uncertainty avoiding species. None of us like uncertainty, but creating an environment in which that tension can occur. If people aren't uncomfortable, you're probably not creating the conditions in which the sorts of things that you need to succeed are going to emerge.
The divergence in the types of transformation, the types of change initiatives that are happening across the organization is really varied. You have everything from technology implementations with the pace of technology are dealing with their own factors of agility and things are moving fast in the technology space. I know you're spending a lot of time on AI, to clients that have very strategic projects that are very different from that. It could be anything from dealing with a new regulatory change, a policy change in their business, thinking about their business model and thinking about, how they're going to make money in the future and what they might need to be doing to change their business model. And so I'm finding that just grappling with how do you programmatically connect all of that and make sure it's got that golden thread back to executing on the strategy, that's a real topic that I think people are really open to having, and it's a conversation that I think always leads to an interesting dialogue.
I talk a lot to the team about, in a sense, dealing with the here and now and the there and then. And the here and now and the there and then are very different for everybody. Exactly to your point, you might be dealing with the challenges of how the marketplace is evolving around you, or you might be dealing with the challenges of thinking through, how do some genuinely important operational imperative like cybersecurity or your source to pay process need to change. I don't necessarily think about there being a golden thread through all the initiatives. What I think I try and do is say, actually, how are you finding the balance between the here and now and the there and then? And what does that mean for you? So that you can make meaningful steps in the right direction, but still anchor yourself back to stuff that's got to matter today. Maybe half a dozen years ago, I would have been big picture, big vision, we must paint a picture and sort of work backwards. I'm probably more today about, you need to have a North Star. You need to set yourself a stretch objective, which is challenging enough that causes you to have to think differently. The only way to move to the future is to start where you are today and make, concrete steps towards it. And I find that as a way of creating at least a thread through the narrative. I think everybody has to find a balance between selectively forgetting the past, managing the present, and then creating the future. And if that doesn't feel complicated and hard, you're probably too much in one of those boxes. I don't have a way of weaving a roadmap together when things are so disparate, but I think there is a way of weaving together the sort of thinking and approach that makes it more consistent, so you can have a more rich dialogue amongst one another about, are you finding that balance right? So the reason why it's so hard for people to forget the past is because it's what's made them successful. There's always something in what you've been doing that you want to preserve and take forward. I think one of the things about transformation in general is, maybe sometimes I don't even like the word. Sometimes I think if people ask you, are you moving quickly enough? I think sometimes it's almost like a vanity question for them to feel better about, their perspective on the world. I think what's really important is, are you building real compounding edge and capabilities that help you just get, better and better and better and better over time? And I think that's one way of, framing transformation in terms of something which just, every year you are just more and more excellent, and you've built a foundation which is both continuously evolvable, but frankly, epically good.
And you set that as an infinite goal.
Yeah.
So that you never get there.
Yeah.
So that you are constantly pushing yourself to be better. What are your views on how we as organizations can create value with technology, become more outcomes focused? What are some of the things that you have done around this space of ensuring that technology actually delivers value to the organization?
I'd start with two things. I think first, back to having the anchoring goal. It's so simple, you keep coming back to, will it make us a better investor? Because being a better investor is going to allow us to fulfill our obligations to contributors and beneficiaries. The second thing, AI is a really fascinating topic as an example, and you see many debates about, is it truly intelligent, is it really reasoning, etc. I think the basic question with technology is always, is it useful? That's the fundamental anchoring test. Is it useful? Will it allow you to do something today or tomorrow that you couldn't do today in a better way? That's for me a real guide in terms of how I think about technology, because then you've got to say, well, how do I get technology into the hands of people that can do something valuable and useful with it? So for me, that's the real anchor. I've talked a number of times, we're a product-oriented model. And the piece I like about the product-oriented model is, A, it's very simple. Teams can understand that they've got a mission to build a product. The product needs to get into the hands of colleagues who can do something useful with it. If colleagues don't want to use it, it means it's not fulfilling the need. If you were selling a product in the open market and people weren't buying it, you'd realize you didn't have product fit.
Yeah.
It's no different, I think, internally in organizations, but it does require a subtle change of shift where you're like, I've got to be prepared to take the feedback of whether this is proving valuable and useful to people. And what does that drive you to do? That drives you to engage with colleagues. It drives you to think about, user experience. It drives you to, get something into the hands of people that they can then build upon, and you can get more feedback. So I think I anchor back to simple purpose, does it make a better investor? And then the sort of guiding principle of, is it useful?
How do you make the conversation for the business real with technology so that we're not bombarding them with a lot of technical speak? How are you navigating that?
Anytime you get multiple disciplines together, right? I mean, I think, the world is more complicated. To solve puzzles today, you need investment expertise, technology expertise, legal, compliance, all flavors of expertise need to come together. And getting people who talk different languages to work together is just genuinely difficult because they legitimately talk different languages. So if it doesn't feel like it's difficult, you need legal expertise or compliance. These are all flavors of dialogue that you need to have. I think at the heart of it, to be candid, is you've got to sort of develop trust and empathy amongst people. You've got to take the time to sort of understand a little bit the perspective of your colleagues coming from in terms of why what they adding into the discussion is important and additive, and you've got to trust one another that that's really meaningful. So I think trust and empathy at the heart of making it work. And of course, that's difficult.
It is very difficult, and it is difficult to learn the languages of each other. I can think of this one example where, somebody was going on and on about architecture and the other individual was going on and on about operating model. And after listening to them for 30 minutes go back and forth, I was able to help them see you're actually talking about common things. You're just using your own language, right? So getting everyone to stand in each other's shoes and actually listen and learn and seek and ask questions. What is it that you're actually trying to say? And then have them surface it on the table. It's really interesting when you see them actually have that light bulb moment and actually realize that they're saying similar things. They're just using it from their own lens or their own background. But when you can get that, that's a real tipping point, I think.
If this wasn't hard and difficult, everyone would have cracked, cross-functional teaming, and we wouldn't be discussing, why that's like a key part trying to make this stuff happen. Things I think are helpful, particularly in cross-functional teams, don't say yes but, say yes and. I mean, that's like a very practical thing I think teams can do. Often if you are embedded in your own expertise, you've heard somebody say something about technology and you're thinking from a compliance perspective, it might be tempting to go, yes, but what you don't understand is the following. But I think you can just turn the language around and say, actually, yes, and here's something we need to think about in terms of compliance on top of it. So I think even simple things in terms of coaching people a little bit more into the just say yes and, not yes but, actually can help change the nature of a dialogue.
Another one, just ask questions.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that? When you asked that question, what were you thinking, right? Say more. I'd like to learn more. It's a simple thing, but we're not, as humans, sometimes we feel the need to show our expertise a lot and credentialize ourselves so people know, I actually know what I'm talking about. The simple art of asking questions is, I think, something we could practice more.
I agree. I heard this wonderful podcast by a guy called Gary Klein. He's a decision scientist, and he said something I thought was profound. He said, every insight is disorienting. So every time you hear something that your brain wasn't expecting to hear, you have this sort of disorienting moment. That's a lot of what you see in cross-functional teaming. Somebody says something, you go, oh my goodness me, I haven't thought about that. And you get disoriented. And one of the reactions to disoriented is to be closed. Yeah. The other is to be actually say more, tell me more, help me understand.
I know you love to read, I love to read. What are you reading these days?
So I've just finished Why Information Grows. By a chap called Cesar Hidalgo. I think he was at MIT, and that's about how you can look at the way networks or products, ultimately economies, grow from the context of sort of diversity, information, and it's a very different way of sort of looking at the economy and how it grows and where things might move to and how countries might be able to move. And I find that fascinating because I think the alternative ways at looking at problems that we've thought about for a long period of time, I'm no economist, and there's obviously lots of books about economics, but I find people that bring new techniques to look at a problem in a new way, so you can generate some genuinely complementary insight. That's the sort of thing I love to just read, and maybe it's not mainstream, but it adds something into your sort of thought process. Michelle, what are you reading?
I always find what I'm reading to be very practical, given where I'm at, new role, new challenges, network level. I've diverged back to a book I actually read a long time ago, which is Change Your Questions, Change Your Life, because I just found that I needed to get myself back in that inquisitive mindset. One of the things that the book talks about is this concept of queue storming, which is get two individuals that are thinking of a path forward in a room and rapidly list out every possible question you could possibly think that you need to be thinking about. And it just gives you a new frame of context as you're going into a new stakeholder interaction of how you might approach getting inside of what they're really thinking and feeling so that you can more effectively, navigate and maneuver. And I've found it very effective for not only with my colleagues, but with clients where I'm just wondering why they're taking a stance on a certain thing. The art of asking a few questions to pull that out of them. And, people want to be listened to, so we forget sometimes how powerful asking a question can be. At the end of the day, when you think about transformation, you can change, things and widgets, but you're changing people to get transformation to happen. I believe, at least, you start with changing humans' behaviors, and over time behaviors change, and that changes culture. So interested in your thoughts on anything that we can technically do to move the needle, examples that you might have of that, or even things that we can do with, just thinking about, some of the stuff we've talked about change how you ask questions, and, the softer things that we can do around culture and behaviors. Maybe
two things I sort of think about. I remember the first time I took on a relatively large scale role, in a kind of classic line role, but with about 1,500 people. Coming from leading a team of a few hundred people to a team of 1,500 people, the job was legitimately different. It was just different. In a team of 200 people, I could pretend, I could imagine, I could convince myself that I knew what was going on. I didn't, but you could convince yourself. And when I looked at a team of 1,500 people, I sort of just had to disabuse myself of the illusion that I could know what was going on. And then you're like, well, what do I do? How do I contribute? And I went down quite a long trail of I don't know quite how to do the job because I can't. So I came quite quickly to the view that the only thing I could do was help shape the context so people could work in the best way that they could. So that's a real sort of underpinning of my philosophy. Now, I'd argue there's plenty of research that backs this up, but the way I think about it is context drives behavior, drives performance. And I use examples from my kids. James, 15, Jessica, 17. Of course, I want them to continue to spend time together. And I set up a context on a Sunday and Monday. They'd watch something together, pick something, watch something together. All the way through getting up to the point where they found something, it's disagreement. And then once they're in the zone of watching something together, all you can hear is them chatting away. That's a little bit of the sort of harsh version of it, but trying to set up an environment in which they can find some common ground and do something changes just the very nature of their behavior. So I think the role of leaders in an organization ultimately is to make sure the context is shaped that ultimately allows colleagues to really do their best work. So if I take the example of technology, why do I believe that the product-oriented mode of technology operation is better than the project mode of organization? Because I think when you set up a context which is a fixed team that can get better over time, cross-functional skills, getting to know one another, understand each other's perspectives, with a steady, not peaky up and down, we just didn't dream of this today and dream of that tomorrow, but they're there to sort of build a product and get into the hands of colleagues to get real feedback of it. I believe that context allows people to do better work in technology and get valuable things into colleagues' hands. So when I look at my role as a leader in an organization, I think about what is it I can do to shape the context that's going to allow people to, in a sense, behave in a way that's the best for them, to get the most out of them in terms of their creativity, their productivity, their inspiration that goes into it. So that's probably a little bit of the sort of the philosophy of how I think about it. And I probably bring that sort of context drives behavior, drives performance into everything. Something about the practice of leadership where it's almost like there are some schools of philosophy you can only learn it by doing it. I think that's a bit like saying you could only learn to be a nuclear scientist by building a nuclear reactor. Well, no individual nuclear scientists have built a nuclear reactor. They've built on the work of others and they've leveraged the expertise from elsewhere. So, I'm known as the framework junkie. But I think they're super valuable. I mean, so the example, one of my favorite authors is Damon Centola, and he's written 2 books, one called How Behavior Spreads and Change How Big Things Get Done. And what Damon talks about, where and how to start change. And then when you've got some momentum, how do you actually build, if you like, the social proof that helps reinforce it? How does that help to your journey point? It's a very amorphous thing. And actually culture really is, when you watch an organization, culture is the norms and the habits and the routines of what the organization does. So you might want to start culture change by, papering the walls with culture slogans, or you might want to think about where can you start to have a new, adjust the norms and behaviors, help, teams do something different. And then how do you think about connecting that social proof across the organization so it spreads more rapidly? And that's it. One of the things I like about Damon's work is, he really digs into the sort of the science and research and practical ways of doing that.
And there is science and research behind this, right? Yeah. There's science and research around how our brains work and how we, consume. And, it is actually quite scientific. So I think it's really useful. Those norms and behaviors are the sum total of behaviors, and that's what drives the culture change, right?
The hardest thing for any person, leader, I think in some sense to do is, of course I understand people because I am one. But actually what we don't understand is the dynamics of how large teams and societies actually work, right? And I think that's where the science comes into it, because actually the way we operate in small scale environments is not the same as what emerges when you're operating, many tens of teams or many hundreds of teams or many thousands of teams. And I think you really can bring real rich insight into how you approach change problems.
What I think we need to get better at, organizations, leaders, is the how, and being receptive to maneuvering the approaches on the how, because the world is constantly changing on us, right? The people that we're working with are constantly changing, and the things are changing around us, and technology is moving fast, and there'll be a new author that writes something that you or I pick the book up and go, wow, what an insightful thought. I think those new leaders need to be adept at being flexible on continuous learning and then adjusting on the how.
We also do a lot of things because we have beliefs. We believe in our product and our offering, or whatever happens. And I think one just genuinely valuable test that we try and continue to use all the time now is what would have to be true for those beliefs to be true, and therefore what is it you're looking at in terms of markers in the world for what is no longer true, so those beliefs themselves are no longer true. And I think particularly as we move into the age of AI, some things that you believe to be true are no longer going to be true. Then you have to think about, well, actually, with that new information, with new facts, change your mind. But that discipline of what are my beliefs, what would have to be true for them to still be valid, and therefore by definition, what are you looking for them no longer to be valid? I think having that, if you like, discipline, even just using, the acronym comes out a lot in our discussions, WWHTBT, what would have to be true.
Being flexible enough to know that you're going to check in on the beliefs. Does anything around me change so I can adjust beliefs that I held to be very true?
I think particularly with AI, there's lots of mathematical underpinnings, but for those that are sort of mathematical Bayes theorem, the idea of priors, new information arrives, what's my new perspective? We're in a world where you can't operate without being a Bayesian. Every organization that's going to succeed is going to be a Bayesian organization.
Yeah. I was going to ask you what you're most excited about for the next 6 to 12 months, but maybe it's my frame of mind these days. What are you most worried about, or what are you most scared about? I think that would make for interesting listening, because I think a lot of leaders are grappling with a lot of things.
The way I describe it is, there has never been a worse time to be average. But worse than that, you've got to work out where you are average. Where you genuinely really have edge. And in a world where above average knowledge, above average capabilities, above average heuristics are available instantly everywhere to everyone, ubiquity across the world, the pressure on, first of all, even knowing that you still have an edge. And if you do still have an edge, how you go around the learning loop faster and faster than anybody else to maintain that edge. In that sense, I'm excited by the challenge, but the ability to sort of really confront the brutal facts about where your edge may be being eroded, and therefore what you've got to do to either create new edges or maintain edges. I think genuinely that's something we should all be worried about, but because we're entering a world where amazing capabilities are instantaneously available, ubiquity to everybody at their fingertips.
I'm intensely passionate about making a difference, whether that's the work that we do with clients or the work I do, for our own organization. I'm also intensely loyal, both to my clients and to our organization. And so I just worry a lot about pulling out all the stops and all the different approaches and angles to really help them move, the things they need to do forward. And I usually package those because that's the work that I do. And is the change moving forward? Is it creating the outcome? And so I worry how to be the most effective at that on a daily basis. And it's what keeps me up at night.
Which is great. I'm lucky to have you.
Yeah. What continues to surprise me is just the diversity of perspectives on even topics like AI and where it's going to go and where it's going to take us. You've got, the two bookends and everything in between. And I suppose there is something to learn from that diversity of perspective. Why is it that you don't think AI is real and is going to fundamentally shift how and what we do? And, getting inside that thinking, because then and only then can you maybe move them to a place of, this is real, it's here, and it's not going away, and it's getting more powerful every day.
The ability to just hear from different perspectives. And there's always a nugget somewhere in that which can actually make, how you're moving forward more creative and more constructive. So I agree with you. I think there is such a range of perspectives, particularly around AI, but there is a range of perspectives about the people that are creating the tools around AI in terms of where they think it's going to go. So we're still not clear where some of those things are going to land, but the reasonable person is comfortable with the world. and then the unreasonable person isn't, and therefore progress has to be some extent driven by the unreasonable people. And I think there's something useful in that.
What's the most exciting and powerful about that is when you can take the two bookends of the spectrum, or the two divergent thinking, and techniques and conversation, bring them together, and everybody lands on that same place. That's I think when we're going to see a real progress. The skills of the future are going to change with AI, I think. I actually think AI is going to play a role in augmenting our skills of the future. So some of the conversations I've been involved in recently are even just how the pace of this technology is even changing curriculums in education for the people that are entering into our workforce. And they're seeing this convergence of sciences, arts, business skills, kind of coming together, because technology, AI, is, as we talked about earlier, closing that gap. So I don't know that I have a perfect answer other than to say I think there's a convergence of skills that's coming, and it's going to be one part the human and one part AI. And I think we have to constantly be thinking about our talent plans and skills of the future in light of that.
Comfortable dialoguing and interacting with new forms of intelligence.
So as always, love chatting with you. Always find the conversation really insightful, and I'm just so pleased that you joined me on the topic today. So I really enjoyed the conversation.
No, it's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed it, Michelle, and there's plenty of work to do.
There is.